end up with? Consciousness. And what does the attraction between human beings ultimately end up with? A baby. Consciousness again. He says the same rule governs the whole universe. He says we have different ways of speaking of it, but it is the basic law of the universe. Attraction, union, consciousness. He says this goes on. He says one of the things that happens with the birth of Jesus Christ is that evolution of human beings becomes directed. And remember we talked about directed or random evolution? That when God the Father incarnated his Son Jesus and he walked among us, you and I can look at Jesus now and know where we're going with this evolution. The same way the guy who's breeding dogs suddenly looks down and sees a white dog with black spots and says, by God, that's what we want. Then he knows the direction to go, and the evolution is directed. You and I are living in an age of directed evolution. Since Jesus Christ, you and I actually know what we're supposed to be. We actually know what human beings are evolving towards. One day, we will all be like Jesus. And one day, people born into this world will be Jesus. Jesus is the goal towards which we're going. So we can direct it. We don't randomly wait. You know, well, that looks good. And this could. No. That's what it's about. We're directed to Jesus himself. And he used an example from the United States. He says, random evolution that went on. Do you know that we had slavery for 7,000 years? And if you look in the United States, in 200 years, you and I have moved from having slavery to a point where we're embarrassed to make an ethnic slur. Okay, it's not just that slavery ended. It's now we wouldn't even, make the ethnic slur. And the fact of the matter is, why did the movement from slavery to ethnic slur occur in 200 years? And the movement from slavery to the end of slavery takes 7,000. He says it's because of the introduction of Jesus in history. Once you begin directed evolution, evolution speeds up. And so now we're in this period of directed evolution with regards to Jesus. He says, another thing about evolution is to understand that everything contributes, nature learns, and everything's important. As in the process of evolution, let's say you're breeding the dogs, and in the breeding of the dogs, you have two puppies in the same litter that actually turn out to be white with black spots. So this is wonderful, so you can breed them yourself. Well, no. You breed those two puppies together from the same litter, you're not going to be pleased with what turns out. And with Dalmatians, the principal problem is deafness and blindness, okay? And so, even though the thing went wrong, you've learned now. And so, in the process of evolution, there is no mistake. All the things that occur in evolution, evolution learns from. In fact, I'll give you an example of a thing with regards to evolution. I was at a lecture at the Catholic University in Washington, D.C. And the guy was doing a lecture on the termination of the dinosaurs. And, there's some people who believe it was disease, and some people believe it was one thing or another, but however they ended. And he was talking, his lecture was on how the variety of dinosaurs grew, this huge variety, and then they're gone. And, it gets through all this, and he's talking about the tragedy, the ending, and everything. And then he reaches down, and he pulls out of a little cage, he lifts this thing up. Now, I'm in the audience, so I flat out swear it's a mouse. Okay, it looks, for all the world to me, like a mouse. He holds it up, it's a mouse. And it's actually a shrew. A shrew is a little animal, it looks like a mouse, but it's a ferocious meat eater, okay? And so anyway, he holds this thing away from his finger, I might point out. So he holds this little thing out, and he says, what does the end of the dinosaur do? He says, this little thing lived underground and could never come onto the surface of the ground until after the dinosaur was gone. He says, this is a shrew. And he says, it is the oldest mammal that exists. So he says, all the mammals on the face of the earth, he contends, are descended from this. He says, we wouldn't even be here if the dinosaurs hadn't died. was the end of the dinosaurs that allowed us to rise and become significant. So he says, in evolution, nothing that happens is bad. Okay? Everything contributes. Everything is a part of this. And I guess if I were to take it, and this is one of the things I learned from Chardin. Chardin said that when you look at God with regards to creation, there's a mantra that God recites with regards to creation. And the mantra that God recites is, "It is good." And you watch God, create the light in the pages of Genesis. It says, and God saw it was good. And then we have, water. God saw it was good. Trees. God saw it was good. God saw it was good. God saw it was good. And he says you should make that the mantra of your life in everything that goes on, because it gives you an attitude to dealing with things. And I'll give you an example in my own life. I tried, Chardin is the spirituality I try and follow. So I've tried to make it really a part of my life. But the day the doctor told me I had cancer, I said that in my heart, because I just practiced doing it. It's a conditioned response. So the doctor says, "You have cancer," and I said, "And it is good." And then what you have to do is you figure out how it's good. I want you to know with cancer, that is not an easy project. And I'd like you to know it isn't completed yet. But the idea is, if it happens, it ultimately is good. And you begin to look for the good in it, rather than the problem with it. Did I have cancer because God wants me to meet some people that I would never have met without cancer, and I need to witness to them? Does God give me cancer because I'm going to meet someone who is going to help me change my life? Everything that happens to me isn't really for the good of other people. It could be for the good of me. What is the reason? Well, you can work on the reason all you want, just as long as you never give up the truth that this is good. No matter what happens, this is good, because somehow this will move all of humanity closer to Jesus Christ. Somehow, whether I understand it or not. And the idea is that everything that happens to you is really important. One of the parishioners was telling me one time, about a week ago, that she was talking to her daughter, and she said to her daughter something that I think every parent has said to every child, and every child has heard at least once from your parent. I know I've heard it several times from mine. But anyway, what she said to her daughter is, the entire world does not revolve around you, okay? And her daughter, who is a high school student, I thought this was very interesting. It would never have occurred to me at that age. But as a high school student, a bright girl, she was thinking about, she says, in a sense it does. And she began to talk to, when you study in science, let's say astronomy, if you study astronomy, do you know that when you look around the universe, we have no idea where the center of the universe is, or if there is a center. But when you study the universe, you can pick any point, and you can analyze everything as though it is the center. So in a real sense, everyone, in fact, is the center of the universe to a degree. Okay? Now, you're not more center than someone else, or less center, but to a certain sense, everything, in a way, relates to you. And when you study the universe, you could take anything. You could take something as ridiculous as our moon and relate the entire universe to it. It's very easy to do that in the area of astronomy. So to understand that not only is what going on with you good, it is crucially and absolutely important to this evolution towards Jesus Christ. It is very, very significant. And sometimes the worst things that happen to us are the most important things in this process, both for us and for the world, as a community. He says, everything works to the good of those who love God. And, we realize that that's a direct quote from Paul. And to understand that all these things ultimately work to the good. Now, what he tells us is that Jesus, when he walks the face of the earth, is the visible expression of God the Father. And this is a basic theological point. That to understand that God is as visible as he gets. in Jesus. And you know as much as you can about God the Father by looking at Jesus, the Son of God. And I really like to point this out because oftentimes preachers give a picture of God, let's say as a judge or as a... I'm thinking of these people who picket at the funerals for soldiers, who will say, God hates fags, and that's why your soldier died. And you don't know, that soldier might be more against homosexuals than the people who are picketing. You have no idea. He just died as a soldier in the war. And that they go on with, well, they paint a picture of God that you cannot imagine Jesus doing. Okay? If you look at Jesus, you have to understand anything I want to say about God. Like when I was a little boy, I was taught very much, the final judgment thing with God as judge and everything. You cannot imagine Jesus standing there acting that way, And so the most we know of God is Jesus. So anytime someone says something about God, you need to say, does this fit comfortably